Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is me showcasing what is probably the most game-breaking bug in Destiny 2 since the crafting. And all it takes to replicate it is Sturm and another Together Forever weapon like Drang, for example. If you're struggling with solo content, solo flawless content, or you just want to make literally any PvE activity incredibly easy, this is the video for you. Getting right into it, what is the exploit and how do you do it? All you need is Sturm and another Together Forever weapon. This can be the original Drang, this can be the craftable version of Drang, this can be the new rocket sidearm. Any other Together Forever weapon is the only thing you need to pair with Sturm, and that's it. All you need to do is get a single kill with the Together Forever weapon, which loads an overcharged round shot into Sturm. Once you have that, as long as you have Sturm equipped, all of your ability damage is boosted by around 3.5 times. This damage boost is so massive that you really don't need to rock other things like Tractor Cannon, 1-2 Punch, Verity, for example, to boost your ability damage. The boost coming from Sturm is so strong, you really only need to commit to using Sturm specifically. Now, what you can actually use with this exploit varies from class to class. In general, though, most melee and grenades will work with Sturm flat out. There are some supers that also work with this exploit, but let me break down class by class what abilities and what setups I would personally recommend using, and which ones actually take advantage of Sturm the best. Starting off here on Titan, as far as what works with Sturm, again, pretty much any melee or grenade setup works. Personally speaking, I think Bonk Titan is just by far the best just because it's a pseudo infinite melee. It's very easy to upkeep. And again, you don't really even need to swap to stuff like 1-2 Punch or Tractor Cannon to boost your damage. You can just have Sturm out and then just constantly press melee and it'll just shred through pretty much anything. With this exploit, I was able to one-bell Keitel with no other buffs or debuffs other than Worm God and Sturm. It's incredibly powerful. Another setup I'd recommend is Wishful Ignorance with Fletched Storm. This has been a setup that's been very strong since Edge of Fate's released, and although it did get slightly nerfed recently, the Sturm exploit makes it far stronger than it ever was, and if you have a full fire team that you can actually benefit from Banner of War and Wishful Ignorance's regen effect, you can easily melt raid bosses with this setup from any range. And then surprising absolutely no one, Consecration with Knockout on Prismatic Titan is also very broken with this setup. Again, it's a free 3.5 times damage boost, and whenever you stack that with things like Facet of Courage, for example, or the Shield Crush artifact perk, it can lead to some ridiculous damage values. Now, as far as Titan goes, those are really the big ones, but again, any melee or grenade setup you have will work with this. So if you have like an Ashen Wake build or an Insurmountable Skull Fort build, maybe you really like building it to Thunderclap in some way, for example, you can pretty much use Sturm and Drang with that setup and you just deal way more damage. It has perfect compatibility, there's no other setup required. However, if you're interested in using supers, this is where restrictions come into play. When you're using a super, Sturm has to be equipped in your inventory, and if you cast, say, Thunder Crash, for example, you'll notice that the HUD inventory is basically removed, meaning that the weapon you're currently holding is unequipped. This means that stuff like Thunder Crash will not get buffed by the Sturm exploit because you're not technically holding any weapon, and Sturm needs to be currently equipped in order to give the buff through the glitch. Because of this, Thunder Crash itself will not receive a damage buff. After you come out of Thunder Crash, the aftershocks afterwards will, but the bulk of your damage through the impact will not get buffed. This is the same for stuff like Blade Fury because you're not actually holding Sturm when this is used, so you don't get any damage buff. Twilight Arsenal could technically work, but you would need to finish the casting animation for the super and pull Sturm out after it's over and have the projectiles not yet hit to get the damage buff. So in theory, you could use Twilight Arsenal and receive the damage buff, but it's very weird with its timing, and you basically have to throw these things across the map to do so, and you're only really going to benefit on the last one, so it's not really that much of a benefit. Glacial Quake is where we start to see some potential with the Sturm glitch on Titan, because Crystal Shatter damage counts as ability damage, and this includes stuff like your Glacial Grenade. With Glacial Quake, you could generate a ton of stasis crystals, and then once you're done using your super, just simply pull out Sturm with the overcharge round, and all of the shatter damage coming from those stasis crystals will get the Sturm boost on top of it. So the TDO that could potentially come about from the super with the Sturm glitch is ridiculously strong. With that said, it's incredibly hard to pull off and really inconsistent, and so because of that, I wouldn't really recommend using it, although the potential for this thing is insane. The one super there is some legitimate potential with the Sturm exploit is Burning Maul on Solar Titan combined with Pyrogill Gauntlets. The travel time of the solar-seeking projectiles from your super is long enough that you can come out of the super animation cast and equip Sturm as long as you used it from far enough away. This will allow the impact damage as well as the cyclone damage of the super to get the Sturm buff. And again, it's around 3.5 times total damage from all abilities when it's equipped. Again, it is a bit awkward to use because not only can the projectiles just not hit your target and go hit something else, but also you have to be sufficiently far enough away that you have enough travel time to re-equip Sturm, but not too far away that your projectiles don't ever reach their target, because there is a travel distance limit on them. But again, that's pretty much it for Titan. Bonk Titan, Fletched Storm with Wishful Ignorance, Consecration Knockout, which is just kind of a staple at this point, as well as stuff like Pyro Gauntlets with Burning Maul. Those are really the best builds that I would recommend for Titan to take advantage of this bug. But again, if you have any ability set up, just throw on Sturm and Drang. Moving on to Warlock, again, pretty much any melee or grenade build works just fine. The highlights, though, that I think work best are going to be mainly on Prismatic Warlock with Lightning Surge and Arcane Needle. You really don't need anything else with this setup. Just by using the Sturm exploit with those two things, it is already stronger than it ever has been. You can also pair this with something like a Spirit of Syntheseps class item and get even more damage basically for free. My overall recommendations for Warlock, though, are pretty much any Verity grenade build that is already pretty common on the class. For example, the Chaos Accelerant Magnetic Grenade or the handheld Nova Bomb ability, when combined with this setup, is ridiculous. It goes from already one-shotting champions to becoming a legitimate boss-killing tool. It's absolutely disgusting. Another one is the classic Swarmer Strand Warlock with the Swarmer's Exotic combined with Mindspin Invocation and the Wanderer, and then any kind of Threadling support, whether it's stuff like Thread of Evolution or a Threadling weapon, for example, as well as the various stuff in the Seasonal Artifact that will also buff Threadling's damage or increase the number of Threadlings that you actually have. In my opinion, Solar Warlock is one of the best subclasses to take advantage of this exploit, simply because of how many different ways you can actually use it and with different setups. Of course, stuff like Verity's Brow and Fusion Grenades comes to mind. In addition, stuff like Starfire Protocol and Fusion Grenades is also a really good option. Hellion also works, so if you want free damage on top of whatever exploit method you're using, just throw on the Hellion aspect in your set. The one thing I do want to point out on Solar Warlock specifically is Well of Radiance. So for those that don't know, when you cast Well of Radiance and you're standing within your own well, any weapon damage that you do is converted to ability damage. Now, it's not extremely practical, but I just want to point out that it does work. While you're in your Well of Radiance after you cast it, you could switch to a non-hit scan weapon, say something like a low velocity rocket, maybe a grenade launcher, for example, and you can fire that weapon and then swap back to Sturm. And as long as you have that overcharge round on Sturm, it'll count that weapon damage, say from that rocket or that grenade launcher, as ability damage, basically giving it a free 3.5 times multiplier. One of the easiest things you can do with this is have a Lasting Impressions rocket with a bunch of other damage boosts, and then after you fire it, just swap to Sturm and wait for it to explode. It's a bit awkward to use, and it isn't necessarily the easiest or strongest setup I would recommend using with the Sturm exploit, specifically for Warlock, but I do want to point out that that is possible if you wanted to have some fun with it. From my testing, there are 3 supers that I would recommend using with the Sturm exploit. Those are Needlestorm, Nova Bomb Cataclysm, and Song of Flame. They aren't technically the only supers that work with it, but they're the ones that I found the most success with using in terms of just producing the largest damage instance. So Needlestorm and Nova Bomb kind of filled the same role. The big thing is, again, you need to have a long enough cast time that you can re-equip Sturm before the projectiles actually explode and detonate on the target. The bulk of Nova Bomb's damage is the initial impact, and of course the detonation of Needlestorm is also most of its damage. So you want to be far enough away to cast these, and before that happens, you can re-equip Sturm. This is much easier on Nova Bomb, but it's still possible to do on Needlestorm. And the nice thing about being on Prismatic Warlock specifically is that you can equip a Spirit of Star Eater class item and get a massive damage boost on top of the Sturm glitch with these supers. The one I really want to talk about, though, is Song of Flame. So Song of Flame is the only super in the game that can truly take advantage of the Sturm glitch in its entirety without having some weird setup restrictions or like range profiling to take care of. With Song of Flame, you never unequip your weapon. So with that in mind, you can just pop Song of Flame while you're wielding Sturm, and again, as long as you have an overcharge round loaded, you just get the damage buff for the entire thing. And even though Song of Flame on its own isn't that great for DPS or total damage when you're just spamming your abilities, when you give it a baseline like 3.5 times damage boost, it's one of the best things in the game, period. And again, being on Prismatic, Song of Flame is objectively better because of the different damage boosts we can attach to it compared to Solar Warlock. First off, we have Facet of Courage, which is a free 10% damage bonus, as long as they're Darkness debuffed while we're dealing damage with Song of Flame, which we can simply apply with stuff like Arcane Needle and unravel them right before we pop our super. Same with stuff like Helion, we can just simply put down a Rift before we actually deal damage. As long as we have Sturm out, this is hitting much, much harder. And again, stuff like a Spirit of Star Eater class item is a massive bonus on top of that. And so combining all these things, you legitimately have one of the best sustained DPS and total damage setups in the entire game. So if you're looking for something to help melt bosses and you're on Warlock and you can get close enough to them to actually use this setup, just use Song of Flame with a Spirit of Star Eater class item, Facet of Courage, unravel them, Helion, and Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's one of the strongest setups we've ever seen in the game. So again, with Warlock, you have a lot of different options with grenade and melee builds, or utilizing different supers like Needle Storm or Nova Bomb. But in my opinion, the objective best setup is Song of Flame on Prismatic with Helion as an aspect, Facet of Courage, Unraveling through Arcane Needle, and then a Spirit of Star Eater class item. So for Hunter, let me be very clear, the best of the best across the board is on Prismatic. But let's go over briefly what the light-based subclasses can do that's unique. For Gunslinger, you can actually utilize Blade Barrage with Knock 'em Down, and because Blade Barrage is a projectile-based super that has a decent amount of travel time, it's actually pretty easy to use the Sturm glitch with it. Again, if you're close range, it can be a bit tricky to use, but as long as you're like 30 plus meters away, you can use this very effectively, and again, it's a free 3 times damage boost. It hits very, very hard. And then for Arcstrider, the main thing you can take advantage of is Gathering Storm, just because, again, it's a projectile-based damage over time super, so it's very easy to take advantage of with the Storm exploit, again, as long as you're far enough away on the initial cast. With that said, you could also utilize stuff like Combination Blow on Arc Hunter, but let's be clear, Combination Blow on Prismatic is just better. The last thing I want to touch on before Prismatic is Whirling Maelstrom on Strand Hunter. This is a much more passive playstyle, but it does turn Whirling Maelstrom into basically an autonomous heavy weapon. It's really funny. I just find that it's a little too passive for my taste, but you can do this. And now we have Prismatic Hunter. And Prismatic Hunter is objectively the best subclass with this. 2 things that you can do that are grenade and melee focused are a standard Combination Blow setup with stuff like Stylus Executioner and Winter Shroud, and then just build into that however much you want. Again, as long as you have Sturm out, you're dealing 3.5 times the damage. For a grenade-focused build, you could have Gunpowder Gamble with Spirit of Verity, which turns your regular Gunpowder Gamble grenade into a nuke with the Sturm glitch. With that said, though, the best grenade variant by far, and in my opinion, the best use of the Sturm glitch, comes from Grapple Melees with Prismatic Hunter. Grapple Melees have always been strong. They've only gotten stronger over time, despite Bungie wanting to nerf them repeatedly. And with Prismatic Hunter in particular, they're still top tier. If you can pull them off and you're comfortable doing it, it's the best sustained DPS in the entire game, period. I did show how this setup works in great detail in a recent video, but for a very quick setup, Combination Blow, Grapple ability, Stylus Executioner when possible, Tether for a 30% debuff, and then for alternative buffs, make sure your grenade is as high as it can be, make sure your melee is as high as it can be just for additional damage, and then for your cloak, just go with Spirit of Syntheseps. All the setups I've already mentioned in this video are fundamentally game-breaking and some of the strongest we've ever seen in each class. This is the strongest out of all of them. And if you thought that Grapple Melees at the start of Edge of Fate were borderline broken, this is considerably stronger than that. Now, at the time of recording, Bungie has disabled this in PvP, but it still works just fine in PvE. I will update you guys in the comments if they do end up nerfing it, that it no longer works. But I believe no one would disagree with me when I say that this is basically the crafting, but for abilities in Destiny 2. So if you're looking to solo content, solo flawless content, or again, just trivialize literally anything in the game, throw on Sturm and Drang, use an ability build, especially one of the ones I went over today, and you're set. Anyways, that's pretty much the whole video. Make sure you guys get out there and have some fun with Sturm while you can, because Bungie is definitely going to fix this thing in the near future. I can't imagine they leave it like this for an extended amount of time at all. So make sure you get out there and take advantage of it while you can. If you're trying to solo flawless stuff, solo stuff, low man, whatever, just have fun breaking the game. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good day.